Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching. I have a really good show for you today. I have Pamela Morrill with me. How you doing today, Pamela?
Good, good.
Excellent. So Pamela's story is going to be really interesting. I think a lot of you are going to enjoy it because what she brings to the table is 31 years of real estate investing, which means she's gone through multiple cycles, both great times to buy, great times to sell, and now as she's entered year 32, she's also started being a private lender. So there's so much stuff we're going to unpack with this show. I thought we would just jump right in. So, Pamela, what are you doing today in the business?
Now I only have one rental left. I have a number of properties that I've sold with owner financing, and as I was getting out, some of
Yep.
them, the lower end properties I sold with owner financing to either current tenants or people I found who needed that lower end housing, wanted to buy it in a few years, and it works for me because it's still monthly income. And then I do the hard money lending.
Yeah, there's a lot there just in that little statement because um, let's unwrap owner financing a little bit. I just did a video, I think, over the weekend with an accountant, and really one of the topics we talked about was owner financing and how it could be right for the seller, in this case yourself. And again, it is that income, right? So why don't you talk about it from a seller's perspective? Why owner financing is something you would tackle it and you'd be okay with?
What was the last part?
It,
And I
what
would
you
be
what you'd be okay with. Why is it okay for you? Some people see seller financing as potentially a seller is risky, and you and I both know it's really not.
I never thought I probably did seller financing for 25 years. I never found it risky because occasionally people will give them back to you, but
Mhm.
I still had the property and I just turn around and do it again. Um, and I never saw that as a problem. It really was not my intention, nor did I particularly want to take them back. And occasionally I would say, "Oh, you do not want to give this back to me. You have money here that
Right.
you can sell the property." And usually the words I would hear were, "I don't want to bother with it." And so they would hand me back a property, and maybe they had $15,000 in equity already. They really, with a little effort, could
Yeah.
have sold the property, but they didn't want to bother. And I thought, well, for
Yeah.
$15,000, I'm certainly willing to bother. So that's how it worked for me.
No, yeah, and that's exactly right. Right. Owner financing, for someone like yourself who bought the asset with the intent of making it a rental, but now as you look to unwind, you still want the cash flow. And by being in first position as that lender, as you say, what's the worst thing that happens is you take it back. What that's not a horrible downside.
And usually I get 8 or 9%,
Yep.
and it's not 8 or 9% on what I purchased the property for, but 8 or 9% on what I'm selling it for, which of
Oh,
course
exactly.
usually at least double. And especially after you've held them for a few years, so it's really a nice income flow. It is a little disappointing not to get that depreciation that you get years, and to have to pay Uncle Sam big chunks of money.
Yeah.
But you pay him now or you pay him later, and I guess I'm paying him later now.
There you go. Paying them later now. I like that. That's awesome. And so if we go back to that kind of story, were you predominantly a buy and hold investor kind of the first couple of decades of your career? Is that fair to say?
I always, usually I would flip one or two every year.
Okay.
Usually what I did was I bought to hold
Yep.
for the most part. But each year I would look at the ones I didn't particularly like. You'll always have one or two that give you more problems, like
Yes.
the neighborhood's not good, or you got lousy neighbors on each side of the house, or even just one side of the
Hmm.
house. And like, oh, get rid of that one. Because, you want life to be as easy as you can make it. And so I would take the ones I didn't like and sell those.
Yeah.
And occasionally something would come up that was just a good deal for a flip, and I
Yep.
would do that. And I didn't, to me, flipping houses is just having a job, though,
Oh,
because
amen.
you have to keep going and buying more houses and renovating more houses to make money. Where with the rentals, that money came in if you were sick or you had a child sick or anything else in life came along, or you wanted to live in Belize in the winter.
Ah,
And but the flipping houses is just a job, and it's nice income, but it's just a job.
I couldn't agree more, right? When you're in this game, you kind of rub elbows with lots of different folks, and one of those groups is quote unquote flippers, right? And they show you big checks and all that stuff, and I look at them going, well, that's a job, right? That's you know those checks go away when you stop flipping houses, and I don't, I'm not here to have another job, right? I want financial freedom and flexibility to do what we want, which is pretty awesome.
I think combining both of them is good.
Hmm.
And some of the guys that I loan to now, they do both.
Yeah.
They have some rentals, but they're always looking for a good flip too. But I think if the market softens, there'll be less of that flipping going on. And
Yeah.
I caution people not to get stuck, with a high-end house.
Oh, amen. Yeah. Investing above the median for the area or 150% of the median is very risky in a market that's turning or getting soft, as you say. So that's very good coaching. Why don't we talk a little bit about being a private money lender? Right, that's a new topic for all of my vendors or interviews. Sorry, I'm guessing short term, right? You're probably sub a year. Is that a fair assumption if you're investing to flippers, or what do you do
Uh,
in general?
I usually will give them 6 months, but my good flippers flip in about 2 to 3 months.
Wow.
The
Okay.
guys that really get in there and get the job done, do a beautiful job,
Hmm.
and their houses sell fast. Those guys do it in 2 to 3 months.
Yeah. Okay.
I've had some of them last more than a year.
It does
They're not
happen.
making money because uh, they've spent too much on the rehabs,
Yeah.
and they devoted way too much time. And hard money lending is expensive.
Oh yeah.
So keeping it for a year is way over the top.
Yeah. Holding
And
cost alone will eat
those
into
are not
profit.
good prospects for me to lend to again, because they'll get stuck one
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
so, but I do some lending for people who want to have rentals.
Oh really?
So
Okay.
they have a lower end property that they want to, especially if it has a couple units in it,
Yeah.
and they want to, and they can pay it off in like 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
Then I'll loan to them at a lower interest rate, because I don't have to keep turning that money.
Yep.
So I do both of those.
Okay.
Uh,
Do you have a preference? Does it really matter? A 3-year, 5-year
I
hold?
It's kind of like having rentals and flips.
Ah,
I
okay.
like both.
Oh, I like the way you think. It's very cool. Being diversified, having the income streams come at a different time, and then your return of capital at different times. That's very sophisticated. I like that. I'm curious, when you started back, if our math is right, in '87, did you always envision yourself at some point getting to this stage where you're the lender? Was that a vision all those years ago?
No, that sort of started when I started selling the
Yeah.
properties. All of a sudden, I had money, which I had never had cash. I had
Yeah.
always been someone who, when I flipped a house or I sold one, I would immediately either buy something else or I would pay off some debt.
Yeah.
So I was careful never to keep cash in my hand because it has a way of just disappearing. And
Oh,
so
I know
that
that
was
world so well.
my philosophy throughout all these years. So, but all of a sudden I had too much money,
Yeah.
and another guy I know who had a property he wanted to keep. I loaned him the money so he could keep that property as a rental,
Yeah.
and that's how it started. almost by accident.
Right.
And then it took me 3 years to get rid of all the properties except for the one I still have.
Yeah.
And uh, in fact, I finished up this summer. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my goodness, I started another business because
Exactly.
I did one loan. It wasn't a fast thing. I did a loan and maybe another month or two will go by and I do another one. And they're not nearly as much work as rehabbing a house or
Yeah.
even having tenants. You know, it's going over some paperwork, talking with them, looking at the properties. And
Mhm.
so uh, it all of a sudden I realized I had another business. And then I decided, well, this seems to be good. It's easy and I like it.
Yeah.
And I in part what I always enjoyed was the hunt
Yes.
of the next new property. So I get a little bit of that when the guys call me to tell me about the next new deal.
Yeah.
I get to talk with them about why it's a good deal and the neighborhood and the property and all of that. So
Yeah.
I guess I get a little entertainment out of it.
The hunt of the chase is so addicting, and I know I still chase it after 16 or 17 years. You still have that after 31. It's part of why we do it, right? We get that little jolt of electricity almost.
Yeah. My husband, we're driving down the street and I said, that house is vacant. And my husband looked at me and he said, well, it may be, but we don't do that anymore. So there
Oh,
you go.
but I could call somebody. I know somebody else that could do that now, honey. That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
He suggests that I wholesale,
Oh,
but
there
I
you go.
don't.
Yeah,
So
it's another thing, right? Yeah. I'm curious. So I think I remember you're in St. Petersburg, Florida. Is that just where you retired, or was that always where you invested, or where's your investments over the 31 years?
my investments have always been in Indianapolis, where I'm from.
Indianapolis. Okay. All right.
This
Did
is
you?
where I went to.
Oh, this is so you live. So did you live in Indianapolis when you started, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
almost all of my investing was in Indianapolis. I did do an apartment complex in Texas one time, but
Okay.
I moved there for that. And
Okay.
then I moved back right as it was a good time to buy in
Ah,
Indianapolis
like
again. And
2010, 11, or where?
yeah, about 9 is when
9.
I went. Yeah.
Good for you. So let's unpack this 31-year history because there's so much there I'm sure we can learn from. Well, I guess the first thing to point out is today's environment, interest rates, let's just call it, 5.5, 6%. Starting back in 87, it was probably double digits. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yes, yes, it was.
And, so it is possible to be a real estate investor with interest rates double what they are today. You
Right.
prove that. Yeah.
The way I bought for years was I had very good credit,
Uh-huh.
uh, but it was difficult to buy those houses that were not habitable, even with good credit.
Sure.
So I just kept applying for credit cards.
Okay.
And I had a stack of them, a big stack of them. And I would buy a house and rehab it with those credit cards.
Okay.
I'd go to the bank with little post-it notes on each of them as to how much I could get off of them, and I would do cash advances and close on a property, renovate the property on the credit cards, and then at that time I had a savings and loan that as soon as I got it, someone in the property, they would loan me the money on the property. And I know it's very conservative, but I never borrowed more than enough to just pay off those credit cards. Then I would do it again and
Yeah.
do it again, over and over and over again. And consequently, because I never over leveraged them,
Yeah.
when the really tough times happened, and most of the people I knew who were doing real estate had a really tough time, and some of them went bankrupt, and some of
Yeah.
them lost properties. it wasn't hard for me to lower my rents because I didn't have that much debt.
Yeah.
So if I bought the house for 50 cents on the dollar, well, that 50 cents on the dollar was all I was in debt for.
Yeah.
And it made a huge difference. It's a little bit of that always living below the amount that you make.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it makes a huge difference. And that's part of why at 50 I was able to live in Belize half the year. And year after year after year was because in the early years I didn't spend it. I
Yeah.
was not out spending the money as fast as I could make it.
Yeah.
And
You
I
were.
certainly wasn't borrowing.
Yeah. There's, again, so much there to sort of acknowledge. And it really mirrors, hopefully, what you've heard on some of my other videos. Fully believe in conservative financing. It may sound risky to start with credit cards but what you then did is, after you got it to the point, because again, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, getting it to a point where you could go back and get a loan and then just taking out just enough to pay back the credit cards. That's awesome. I mean, that's very creative. I mean, today that would be called, what it would be called, buy, repair, lease, refi, or whatever they call it, that Burr process. You invented it, or a version of it, way back in, the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And always staying that conservative. And then you sort of tying this conversation into the one we had earlier, you had chunks of money show up, which you could have blown, right? You could have bought the nicer car, you could have, whatever, but you chose to invest that in the next deal. And it's that consistent execution, living below your means, conservative financing, that got you to a point at 50 where you could go to Belize for 6 months. That's all tied together, and people need to realize that that's all tied together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about cycles, so just a little bit, because again, I've invested through one full cycle, right? Started on the one side of in a seller's market, went through the '08 collapse, invested as much as I could through the collapse, and came out the other side financially free. If my time is right, you actually have done that at least twice.
Yeah, I've done 2 full cycles twice.
Yeah.
And now sold when things are high too.
Yeah. Yeah. The market cycles can be helpful, right?
When I went through the buying cycle in 09, 10, and 11,
Yep.
at that point I had so much experience that, it was a breeze, and it was so much fun.
Yes.
To be able to buy nicer houses in nicer neighborhoods than I had ever been buying before. One of my sons says, "Oh, Mom, back in the day, you used to buy those houses that were low to the ground." They were junkers, they built them almost right on the ground.
Yeah.
And so anyway, then in this last cycle, I was buying nicer houses, which were easy to sell.
Yeah.
And when the time came.
Yeah. So let's.
But there's a lot of money to be made in those low end houses, and in the early years, I needed that cash flow to live.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. I have always been at least 75% of the median for my market. So my market's median is, or at least today, is 250. When I started, it was 150. So I've been buying the kind of 125 to 150 houses, the low to the ground, if you will, affordable housings, because I know I have the largest pool of renters, and that's just what I've always done. I've never bought the new house, right? I've never bought that's a 2,200 square foot, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2-story, 2.5 car garage. Nope, that's not me.
Right. I never did either.
Yeah. So let's talk about changing markets, because I think it'd be remiss of us as 2 experienced folks not to talk about when markets roll over, which is what I think is happening now. We've been through it. You've been through it one extra time than me, but I think there's people that are going to get caught. And I think we sort of alluded to it earlier, and we were talking about hard money. There will be people, and I've done videos on this, if you've only been investing for 5 years, you need to be extra careful, because you've only known the good time.
Yes. One of the people will come to me wanting to borrow money to build houses.
Oh,
And I say, oh, absolutely not, because the profit margin is so small in those new houses,
yeah,
and that's where people always, when the market crashes, they die with it.
absolutely.
Where if somebody's in a low end house, they can always rent it for enough to make their debt and
Yeah.
have a little left over, and they'll survive, because somebody always, especially if the economy goes bad,
Yep.
they still need those low end rents. I
Yeah.
mean, somebody that can't afford a $2,000 rent can maybe afford $900 and
Yes.
or seven,
Yeah.
so
Whatever. Yeah.
right. So um, I'd be real cautious in going into anything at what the median is in your neck of the woods
I couldn't agree
right now.
more. Yeah. Right
Yeah.
now is right now is dicey. It's definitely softening. Listings are going up. I believe actually buyers are going to start to disappear because what I see coming is a negative news cycle. And that's what people don't really understand is real estate is such a people business, and it's usually the largest purchase people make. And if they have Wall Street Journal and CNBC and their local paper saying real estate's bad, they're not going to buy anything. They're going to go, "Oh my God, I'm scared. It's 2008 all over again."
Well, and I also see that uh, baby boomers my age, they're not buying as much now. They're selling their home they raised their families in, and they're often renting now. And then you have the millennials coming in who can't, they're under so much debt,
Yeah.
most of them, that they cannot even begin to think about buying a house. So that leaves a lot of renters.
Hmm.
And so flipping houses, I think, is going to wane, and rentals will take over. And
I
some some cities, it's mostly renters now. It's more than 50% renters.
Yeah. Yeah. I would, if you take a couple of zip codes out of my market that are predominantly owner occupant, it's easily 70%, except for these kind of two little exceptions, are renters. And I see it going that way for the foreseeable future. The other thing to point out about when markets turn, a lot of people think owning rentals, the affordable rentals like we've had, are bad. That's wrong, right? My occupancy rate went up, my rents went up. That's a pretty good equation.
I did go through the one cycle where the rents went down.
All right, let's talk about that.
And that was when anybody who could fog a mirror could buy a house.
Oh,
And
yes, yes.
so the rents went down, and people would call and want to negotiate rents. Well, I had never been through that.
Yeah.
And I talked to a couple old timers at the time, and they said they'd never seen anybody want to negotiate a rent. The landlord had always been the one who controlled such a thing. Well, when there were a lot of rentals out there, the
Yeah.
landlord no longer was in control of what rent he could charge. And you needed to be able to either offer a really nice place,
Yep.
or you needed to lower your rents.
Yeah, just so we could put
And
this
the
in.
quality of renters was very poor.
Oh, it was horrible. I remember. I believe we're talking about kind of 2006 to 8. Is that the time frame you're referring to, roughly?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was a landlord during that phase, and it's my only time that I had to offer incentives, like half off rent or something like that. And you're right, the quality was horrible.
That was the time to sell.
Oh, amen. We got lucky, and I talk about this a bunch. I call it lucky, but basically we couldn't buy anything that made financial sense. So what we did is, at the time we had 8 properties, 7 houses and 1 duplex. What we did, and is in 2008, we 1031 all of those. So we turned 8 properties into basically 8 apartment buildings. So we moved all the equity over. Our cash flow went up. We went from 8 to 80 units. And what we found is there was a 5-unit to 20-unit area that was there was so much value in, because everybody was buying houses, but nobody was buying the small commercial. It was weird now that I look back on it.
That's when I bought the apartment building in Texas also.
Yeah, it was really, it was an odd time. And I honestly hope I never experience it again, because it was a financial catastrophe, right? While this lending to anybody that could sign their name, prices went up so artificially with bad loans and bad structures. And we suffered for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, what other, I mean, you just have such a great history and track record. What about, why don't we, so we talked about rolling over sort of, at the top going down. Why don't we talk about, because we both experienced the bottoming out a couple of times, why don't we talk about what that kind of felt like as markets sort of continued down, but at some point bounce and come back. You remember those buyers markets turning into sellers markets?
Yeah, then I started buying.
Yeah. Yeah. When they're giving stuff away for land value, that's probably a good time to buy, right?
Good time to buy. I don't know. I was just, in some ways, I was always still looking for the good deal.
Sure.
The deals got better. And I will say, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I was always pretty focused,
Yeah.
and I was either buying or I was selling.
Yeah.
And sometimes I was doing both, but I always thought buying was much more fun than selling.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious, your I'll call it deal volume, because I'm not really sure what to call it. Were you doing kind of like all in, like, were we talking 20 transactions a year, 40? Where were you kind of, just averages through your time?
Probably eight to 10 a year.
That's eight or 10 buys or sales.
Yeah.
Okay.
Buys and sales.
Yeah.
I had children, part of the reason I did real estate was so that I could keep an eye on those teenage boys.
Yeah, we're trouble.
When they got to that place where they were too old to leave with a sitter,
yeah,
that they could get into way more trouble. That's about the point at which I started buying the real estate. And it turned out to be a real fit for my personality. I liked all the different hats that you wear as a real estate investor.
Would it be fair to call you a stay-at-home mom, or is that not accurate?
Well, I was a stay-at-home mom who had to work.
Oh, stay-at-home mom that had to work. Okay. I got you.
Yeah, I needed a job. And
okay. Now, was real estate the job, or was there another W-2 job in there somewhere we haven't talked about?
Once I started doing the real estate, within a year, I left my job.
Okay. So
but my job was paying very little money, so it wasn't too hard to replace it. And one of the reasons I did it was I had this vision of staying in the job.
Yeah.
And being one of those poor old ladies eating cat food one day. And that was a real motivator.
Yes, that'll get you out of bed and look at real estate.
Very much that could possibly happen to me, but I knew I needed to do something different, something that made more money and had more future to it.
Yeah. So I guess the last question on this kind of area is, why real estate? What was it about real estate investing that was so attractive to you? Clearly your personality just nailed it, but was there something, or maybe a mentor or someone that kind of pointed you in that direction? Do you remember why you went after this so hard?
The person I got the idea from was actually a school teacher who only owned 2 duplexes.
Okay.
But I saw that she was taking vacations and she just lived a lifestyle that a school teacher could not afford. And I desperately needed to find something else to do. And so I picked her brain for a little while.
Yeah.
And then I read 13 books.
13 books. Okay.
13 books before I bought that first property. And the first one is always the hardest.
Yes.
And then I always went to meetings every month, and people helped me along the way, and I just never stopped learning. I will say that I miss that aspect of it too.
Yeah.
Of the real estate community.
Yes. Very cool. Very cool. So as we sort of turn the page on this section, have you thought about what you'll be doing in the next 3 to 5 years? Is it still the private lending or hard money lending, or if the market really turns south, you're going to go back and buy again, or have you given any thought to that?
Uh, I'm going to continue the hard money lending, but if it really goes south, I'll get out and buy a few, but not very many.
I think,
I'll cherry pick a couple really good deals
yeah,
and keep those.
yeah, good for you. And again, back in Indianapolis, I'm assuming.
No, I'll buy down here in Florida. I see myself living here in the
Okay.
next couple years, all year round.
Okay.
And uh, down here, you don't worry about pipes breaking in the
Yeah,
middle of winter,
freezing.
or even somebody moving in the middle of the winter.
Oh yeah, it's a hard time to rent, I would guess. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, I could see you certainly if the market turns the way I think it will, like you say, cherry picking a couple because you just have it in you, your DNA. You're gonna like that's too good to pass up. And then when the market turns again, as it will, you'll sell at hard money lend again. It's pretty awesome. So
I
uh,
I don't know what your viewership is, but I will just say for all of you folks who do real estate investing, that I have watched people in their 70s who've been doing real estate their whole life. And if they don't start selling some of their properties, they get stuck with them. All of a sudden, one day, they'll realize I should have sold some of these, 5 or 10 years ago. And they're too tired
yes,
to take care of them. They're even too tired to get tenants. And then the properties are hard to sell. And so I would just say, when you feel yourself sort of not wanting to take care of your properties anymore,
yeah,
it's time to start getting rid of them. And
I love that advice.
I've never met anybody in their 80s who was still doing a good job
Yeah.
of being a landlord.
Yeah, it takes work, it takes focus, it takes time. And there should be a point where you kind of transition and you enjoy other things. That's why we do it for 31 years. I do it for 16. So we have other ambitions. Real estate's just a vehicle to get to those. Live in Belize, live in St. Petersburg. Tremendous. So I love that advice. And it frankly is not talked about a lot, right? When is the right time to unwind?
When I decided that I was going to start selling,
Yeah.
I started looking for the books on that aspect of real estate investing, and I didn't find any.
I don't think there are any. I
Yeah.
haven't seen any either.
I did a few 1031 exchanges
Yeah.
just to delay that tax
Yeah.
for a little bit, but at some point, unless you're going to die,
Yeah. No, which is not a great outcome, but yeah, it does
you
happen.
have to pay the tax man.
Yeah, yeah, that whole pass on step up basis. Yeah, that is one way to go. But as you sort of hinted, what often happens before that is the asset deteriorates because you're not treating it very well, and pretty soon, if you're not careful, it goes from pride of ownership to slumlord. And then when your heirs get it, they're going to fire sell it because they don't want the headache. I mean, it's just not a good outcome.
Most people's heirs fire sell them anyway.
True. Good point. They're like, I'm out. I don't want what mom and dad
Built
did.
it and they're going to spend it.
That's right. I'm about to get a new car or get a new boat or something. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I always wrap up with this. This has been so much fun. There's so much value I got from this. I'm sure our viewers will as well. What this is for you. What do you want to throw out there? Words of wisdom, books you've read you really like, how to get in contact with you, help if you want anything. The floor is yours. Say anything you would like. This has been great, Pamela.
Okay. When I was buying, one of the things I like to do when I was looking through someone's home, I tried not to talk. I tried to just listen as much as possible. And then when I would decide what I was going to offer them, and they were almost always shocked.
Yeah.
And I would say, I know you're wanting to get more for this property, and I really hope that you can. But just know that this is what I can offer you, and think of me as being that person in your back pocket. And if you decide you don't want to fix up the house, You don't want to list it with a realtor. You don't want people traipsing through your house. You can call me and know that I can buy and it'll be quick and easy,
Yeah.
and I'll just take it the way it sits. And you know, very seldom would someone say immediately, oh yeah, let's just do this. But they often would call back the next day or the next week, or maybe 3 or 4 months later, and usually having done absolutely nothing. And that was probably my best negotiating tool. One thing I did that was, I thought, unusual on the landlord side was, I went to people's homes to take their application.
Ah.
And I did that after a young man who had 1 or 2 duplexes told me he did that. And I said, well, I don't have time for that. And he said, well, how long did that last rehab take you after somebody demolished that house?
Yeah.
And I said, oh, I think 3 months. He said, 3 months, hour and a half. He said, I think you might want to start doing that. And I did do it, and it made a big difference. I quit getting houses back with holes in the walls
Yeah.
and dogs having, you know, dug up the floor and
Yeah.
things like that. And that was helpful. And you might try it.
That's great advice.
And my other thing is, live below your means. So.
That's awesome. Well, Pamela, this has been so much fun for me. I hope you had a good time. I think you've given tremendous value. You give an encouragement to lots of folks just starting, that they can now see where their journey could take them. I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much for reaching out and giving me your time today.
You're welcome. Nice to talk with you.